August 2014. The morning fog clung to the Allegheny River like a grey shroud as Detective Maria Santos pulled her unmarked sedan into the parking lot of the Pittsburgh Police Department's Zone 4 station. 3 unmarked vehicles and 2 patrol cars had already assembled outside the modest brick building on East Carson Street. Santos was reviewing her notes from the previous evening when her partner, Detective James Mitchell, approached her driver's side window with an expression she had never seen in their 4 years working together, a mixture of disbelief and vindication. What began as a routine follow-up on a decades-old evidence review had transformed into the breakthrough that would finally bring justice to a family that had waited 51 years for answers. The call had come in at 6:47 a.m. from Dr. Patricia Hendricks at the Allegheny County Crime Laboratory. The DNA profile extracted from a cigarette butt found near the crime scene in 1963 had finally yielded a match through the combined DNA index system. At 7:23 a.m., Detective Santos received confirmation that the match belonged to Thomas Edwin Kowalski, age 73, a respected retired postal worker who had lived in the same Squirrel Hill neighborhood for over 5 decades. By 8:15 a.m., surveillance teams were positioned outside Kowalski's residence on Shady Avenue, watching as the man who had hidden in plain sight for half a century watered the petunias in his front garden. The breakthrough felt surreal because Thomas Kowalski had been the mailman who delivered sympathy cards to the victim's family in the weeks following the murder. Before we dive deeper into this shocking revelation, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for true crime content that uncovers the details mainstream media coverage leaves behind. Because what you're about to hear about this case will challenge everything you thought you knew about how well we really know our neighbors. Margaret Louise Chen was born on April 3, 1941, in the bustling Lawrenceville neighborhood of Pittsburgh, to parents David Chen, a machinist at the Westinghouse Electric Corporation, and Helen Chen, who worked part-time at Kaufman's department store downtown. At 5 feet 6 inches tall, with shoulder-length black hair that she often wore pulled back with a blue ribbon, Margaret had warm brown eyes and a bright smile that, according to her younger brother Robert, could light up even the gloomiest Pittsburgh winter day. She had a small scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood accident and always wore her grandmother's silver cross necklace, a detail that would later become crucial for identification. Margaret was known throughout the tight-knit community as an ambitious young woman with dreams that extended far beyond the steel-lined horizon of her hometown. Her best friend, Patricia Sullivan, recalled years later, "Maggie was always talking about seeing the world. She had this worn atlas that she'd inherited from her uncle, and she'd spend hours tracing routes to places like Paris and Rome with her finger." Her parents, both first-generation Americans whose own parents had immigrated from China in the early 1900s, had instilled in Margaret a fierce determination to pursue education and independence. At 22, Margaret worked as a secretary at Pittsburgh National Bank downtown, while taking evening classes at the University of Pittsburgh, pursuing a degree in journalism. Her supervisor at the bank, Mr. Harold Peterson, remembered her as meticulous and professional, always arriving 15 minutes early and staying late to ensure every document was perfectly filed. Margaret's brother Robert, who was 19 at the time of her death, recalled that she had been saving money for a trip to New York City, where she hoped to interview for positions at major newspapers. She had this little tin box under her bed where she kept her savings, Robert Chen said during a 1983 interview. Every Friday, she'd add a portion of her paycheck to that box and tell me she was one step closer to her dream. Margaret's daily routine was predictable and centered around her work and studies. She caught the 7:30 a.m. trolley from the Lawrenceville stop, worked until 5:00 p.m., then took evening classes on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. On weekends, she often visited her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Anna Kowalski, helping with grocery shopping and housework. This detail would later take on sinister significance when investigators discovered that Mrs. Kowalski's son, Thomas, had been present during many of these visits. The Pittsburgh of 1963 was a city in transition, caught between its industrial past and an uncertain future. The steel industry that had defined the region for generations was beginning to show signs of strain, though few could have predicted the complete collapse that would come in the following decades. The city's population stood at approximately 604,000, making it the 16th largest city in America. Lawrenceville itself was a working-class neighborhood where families had lived for generations, where front doors were often left unlocked and neighbors looked out for each other's children. The social fabric of the community was woven tight with ethnic enclaves, Polish families on one block, Italian families on another, with smaller populations of Chinese, German, and Irish immigrants, creating a multicultural tapestry that was unusual for the era. St. Augustine Catholic Church served as the neighborhood's spiritual center, while Doherty's Market on Butler Street was where residents gathered to share news and gossip. The local elementary school, Arsenal Elementary, had been the educational foundation for 3 generations of neighborhood children. Politically, Pittsburgh in 1963 was experiencing the optimism of the Kennedy administration while grappling with the growing civil rights movement. The March on Washington had taken place just 3 months before Margaret's death, and discussions about racial equality were beginning to permeate even insular neighborhoods like Lawrenceville. The Pittsburgh Courier, one of the nation's most influential African-American newspapers, was headquartered in the city and provided a progressive voice that influenced local discourse. The neighborhood's geography played a crucial role in the case. Lawrenceville was bounded by the Allegheny River to the south and the Polish Hill neighborhood to the north, connected to downtown Pittsburgh by the 40th Street Bridge. The area where Margaret's body would be found was a small wooded section behind the old Heinz plant, an area that local teenagers sometimes used as a shortcut, but that was largely secluded after dark. The proximity to the river meant that fog was common in the early morning hours, providing natural cover for nefarious activities. November 23, 1963, began like any other Friday for Margaret Chen, though the entire nation was still reeling from President Kennedy's assassination just 1 day earlier. Margaret had called in sick to work, telling her supervisor that she was suffering from a severe headache and needed to rest. Her mother, Helen Chen, later recalled that Margaret had seemed unusually quiet at breakfast, picking at her scrambled eggs and barely touching her coffee. 8:30 a.m. Margaret's brother Robert left for his job at a local garage, noting that his sister was still in her bathrobe reading the morning paper. "She looked pale," he remembered, "but I thought it was just because of all the terrible news about President Kennedy." 10:15 a.m. Mrs. Dorothy Walsh, who lived 2 houses down, saw Margaret leaving her house wearing a dark blue coat and carrying a small purse. Margaret waved and called out, "Good morning, Mrs. Walsh. Terrible about the president, isn't it?" This would be the last time anyone from the immediate neighborhood reported seeing Margaret alive. 11:45 a.m. Margaret was spotted by Thomas Kowalski, the postal worker, near the entrance to the wooded area behind the Heinz plant. Kowalski would later tell investigators that Margaret appeared to be waiting for someone, checking her watch repeatedly. He claimed he had offered to help, but that she had politely declined, saying she was meeting a friend. 1:20 p.m. James Morrison, a worker at the Heinz plant, heard what he described as a woman's scream coming from the wooded area during his lunch break. However, Morrison was inside the noisy plant and could not be certain of the sound's origin. He did not report this until after Margaret's body was discovered. 2:45 p.m. Margaret failed to arrive for her scheduled appointment at the beauty salon, where she had planned to have her hair styled for a family dinner that evening. The salon owner, Mrs. Rose Benedetti, attempted to call the Chen family, but received no answer. 4:30 p.m. Helen Chen returned from her shift at Kaufmann's department store, expecting to find Margaret preparing for the family dinner. The house was empty, and Margaret's bed appeared to have been made hours earlier. 6:15 p.m. The Chen family began making phone calls to Margaret's friends and co-workers, trying to locate their daughter. Patricia Sullivan, Margaret's best friend, told them she had not spoken to Margaret since the previous Tuesday. 7:45 p.m. David Chen contacted the Pittsburgh Police Department to report his daughter missing, though officers initially suggested waiting 24 hours before filing a formal report. Margaret's last written communication was a note found in her bedroom after her disappearance. Written in her neat handwriting, it simply read, "Gone to meet M about the opportunity discussed. Home for dinner. ML." The identity of M would remain a mystery for decades, and the note would become one of the most analyzed pieces of evidence in the case. The discovery of Margaret Chen's body came 36 hours after her disappearance, on a grey Sunday morning that matched the somber mood that had settled over the nation following President Kennedy's assassination. At 9:23 a.m. on November 25th, 8-year-old Timothy Fletcher was walking his family's beagle, Rusty, through the wooded area behind the Heinz plant when the dog began barking frantically and refused to continue on their usual path. Timothy's father, Robert Fletcher, arrived at the scene within minutes of his son's panicked return home. What Robert Fletcher discovered would haunt him for the rest of his life. Margaret Chen's body lay partially concealed beneath a pile of fallen autumn leaves, approximately 50 yards from the main path through the woods. Her dark blue coat was torn at the left shoulder, and her grandmother's silver cross necklace was missing. Her purse was found 15 feet away, its contents scattered across the forest floor. The Pittsburgh police arrived at 10:07 a.m., followed by the Allegheny County Coroner's Office at 10:31 a.m. Detective Frank Sullivan, Patricia Sullivan's uncle and a 20-year veteran of the force, was assigned as the lead investigator. Crime scene photography began at 11:15 a.m., though the technology of 1963 limited the quality and detail that would be available to future investigators. The forensic examination revealed that Margaret had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, likely from a heavy object, such as a rock or piece of wood. Dr. William Hartley, the county medical examiner, determined that death had occurred between 1:00 p.m. and 3:00 p.m. on Friday, November 23rd. The examination also revealed evidence of a struggle, with defensive wounds on Margaret's hands and arms, indicating she had fought against her attacker. 7 pieces of physical evidence were collected from the immediate crime scene. A cigarette butt found near the body, later determined to be a Marlboro brand. A torn piece of fabric that did not match Margaret's clothing. A partial footprint in the mud near a small creek. 3 strands of hair that were not Margaret's, later determined to belong to a Caucasian male. A small metal button, possibly from a coat or jacket. Traces of motor oil on Margaret's coat. And most significantly, biological evidence that would prove crucial 51 years later when DNA technology became available. Detective Sullivan noted in his initial report that the crime scene showed signs of having been hastily arranged to conceal the body, suggesting either panic on the part of the perpetrator or interruption during the commission of the crime. The scattering of Margaret's purse contents in a deliberate pattern led investigators to initially theorize that robbery might have been a motive, though Margaret's $15 in cash and her watch were left untouched. The first officers to respond to the scene, patrolmen Joseph DeMarco and William O'Brien, immediately secured the area and began interviewing potential witnesses. O'Brien later recalled, "The whole neighborhood was already on edge because of President Kennedy's murder, and then this happens to a local girl. People were scared, really scared." News of Margaret's murder spread quickly through the tight-knit Lawrenceville community, creating an atmosphere of fear and suspicion that had never before existed in the neighborhood. Mrs. Anna Kowalski, the elderly woman Margaret had regularly helped, was among the first neighbors to arrive at the Chen family home with food and condolences. Her son Thomas accompanied her, carrying a casserole dish and expressing his shock at the tragedy. "Can you believe that in your own neighborhood someone could harbor such a dark secret for over 50 years? As you're watching this, take a moment to think about your own community, because what happened next in this investigation reveals how even the most thorough police work can miss crucial details when technology hasn't caught up to criminal cunning yet." The initial investigation into Margaret Chen's murder was conducted by a Pittsburgh police department that was typical of early 1960s law enforcement, dedicated and thorough within the limitations of available technology, but lacking the forensic tools that would later revolutionize criminal investigations. The detective division consisted of 12 investigators, handling all major crimes for the city's East End, led by Captain Raymond McBride, a former Navy officer who had joined the force after World War II. Detective Frank Sullivan, despite sharing a surname with Margaret's best friend Patricia, was not related to the family and had been chosen for the case based on his experience with violent crimes. Sullivan had solved 11 of the 13 homicides he had investigated over his career, earning him a reputation as one of the department's most capable detectives. However, the forensic limitations of 1963 meant that evidence we now consider routine, DNA analysis, advanced fingerprinting techniques, computer databases, simply did not exist. The investigation began with a canvass of the neighborhood that eventually encompassed over 200 interviews. 5 primary suspects emerged during the first month of investigation, each presenting compelling motives and opportunity that kept investigators busy pursuing multiple leads simultaneously. The first suspect was Raymond Michael Kowalski, age 26, Thomas Kowalski's younger brother, who had recently been discharged from the army under less than honorable circumstances. Raymond worked sporadically as a construction laborer and had been seen in the area on the day of Margaret's murder. His connection to the victim was indirect. He had attended the same church and had reportedly made inappropriate comments about Margaret to other parishioners. Investigators discovered that Raymond had been drinking at Murphy's Tavern until approximately 12:30 p.m. on November 23rd, providing him with an alibi during the crucial time period. His discharge from the army had been related to alcohol abuse rather than violent behavior, and psychological evaluation suggested he was not capable of the level of violence demonstrated in Margaret's murder. The investigation into Raymond Kowalski was officially closed on January 15, 1964. The second suspect generated considerable attention both within the police department and the community. Dr. Marcus William Thompson, age 34, was a psychiatrist who had recently established a private practice downtown after completing his residency at Western Psychiatric Institute. Thompson had met Margaret Chen during a consultation regarding her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Anna Kowalski, who had been experiencing what would now be recognized as early-stage dementia. Margaret had accompanied Mrs. Kowalski to 2 appointments with Dr. Thompson in October 1963. Several witnesses reported seeing Dr. Thompson's distinctive black Cadillac in the Lawrenceville area on the morning of November 23rd. Thompson initially claimed he had been at his office reviewing patient files, but investigators discovered his appointment book for that day was blank. Under pressure, Thompson admitted he had driven to Lawrenceville with the intention of asking Margaret for a date, but claimed he had lost his nerve and driven away without speaking to her. His alibi was corroborated when investigators discovered he had purchased gasoline at a Texaco station in Oakland at 2:10 p.m., with a receipt showing the transaction time. The gas station was 25 minutes away from the crime scene, making it impossible for him to have committed the murder and still completed the transaction. Dr. Thompson's involvement in the case ended on February 8, 1964, though the scandal effectively ended his practice in Pittsburgh. The third suspect was closer to Margaret's age and social circle. Anthony Joseph Ricci, age 24, worked as a mechanic at the same garage where Margaret's brother Robert was employed. Ricci had expressed romantic interest in Margaret on several occasions, according to Robert Chen, and had been persistent despite Margaret's polite rejections. On November 20th, 3 days before the murder, Robert reported that Ricci had become aggressive when Margaret declined his invitation to attend a movie, stating that she would regret embarrassing him in front of the other workers. Ricci's alibi for November 23rd was initially problematic. He claimed to have been working alone in the garage, performing maintenance on his personal vehicle. However, investigators discovered that Ricci had signed for a parts delivery at 1:45 p.m., and the delivery driver, Samuel Martinez, confirmed the timing of the transaction. Additionally, a comparison of the hair evidence found at the crime scene showed significant differences from Ricci's dark, coarse hair. The investigation into Anthony Ricci concluded on March 2, 1964, though workplace tensions led to Robert Chen eventually finding employment elsewhere. The fourth suspect represented the investigation's most promising lead for nearly 18 months. Gerald Eugene Morrison, age 29, was the cousin of James Morrison, the Heinz plant worker who had reported hearing a scream on the day of the murder. Gerald Morrison had a criminal record including 2 arrests for assault, one involving a female victim, and had recently been released from Allegheny County Jail after serving 6 months for burglary. Morrison had no known connection to Margaret Chen, but investigators theorized that the murder could have been a random attack or an attempted robbery that had escalated to violence. Gerald Morrison's whereabouts on November 23rd could not be accounted for. He claimed to have been walking around the city, but could provide no witnesses to corroborate his activities. Physical evidence comparison proved inconclusive with the limited forensic capabilities available, and Morrison's interrogation sessions stretched across several months. The case against Gerald Morrison ultimately collapsed when investigators learned that he had been in custody at the Allegheny County Jail from November 20th through November 26th for a probation violation, a fact that had been overlooked due to paperwork errors. Morrison was eliminated as a suspect on April 14, 1965. The fifth and final primary suspect emerged from Margaret's academic life at the University of Pittsburgh. Professor David Lawrence Hoffman, age 41, taught the evening journalism course that Margaret attended twice weekly. Several of Margaret's classmates reported that Professor Hoffman had shown unusual interest in Margaret, often asking her to remain after class for extended discussions about her assignments. Sarah Goldman, one of Margaret's classmates, told investigators that Margaret had mentioned feeling uncomfortable with Professor Hoffman's attention and had been considering dropping the class. On November 23rd, Professor Hoffman claimed to have been at home with his wife, grading papers in preparation for the Thanksgiving holiday. His wife, Ellen Hoffman, initially supported his alibi, but later admitted to investigators that she had been visiting her sister in Cleveland from November 22nd through November 25th, leaving her husband alone during the critical time period. Professor Hoffman's academic career and social standing in the community created additional pressure on investigators to be thorough in their examination of his potential involvement. The investigation revealed that Hoffman had been having an affair with another student, which provided a possible motive for wanting to silence Margaret if she had discovered the relationship. However, handwriting analysis of the mysterious note found in Margaret's bedroom showed no similarities to samples of Professor Hoffman's writing, and the physical evidence did not support his involvement. Professor Hoffman was eliminated as a suspect on June 7, 1965, though the scandal surrounding the investigation led to his resignation from the university. By the fall of 1965, the Pittsburgh Police Department had exhausted their primary leads in Margaret Chen's murder case, having conducted over 300 interviews, collected dozens of pieces of physical evidence, and pursued numerous theories about motive and opportunity. The testimony phase revealed the methodical nature of Harold's deception over 5 decades. Detective Maria Santos, now lead investigator on the case, presented a timeline that shocked even veteran court observers. Harold Brennan attended every single memorial service for Margaret, Santos testified. He brought flowers to her grave on the anniversary of her death for 27 consecutive years. He looked Margaret's mother in the eye and promised to help find her daughter's killer. The prosecutor displayed photographs of Harold at various community events, including a 1985 fundraiser for improved street lighting that Margaret's family had organized in her memory. Dr. Patricia Reeves, a forensic psychiatrist who had evaluated Harold during the pre-trial period, explained the psychological profile that emerged from extensive interviews. Mr. Brennan exhibits classic traits of what we term an integrated psychopath, Dr. Reeves explained to the jury. These individuals can maintain elaborate facades of normalcy while harboring deeply antisocial tendencies. They often insert themselves into the aftermath of their crimes, deriving satisfaction from observing the pain they've caused while appearing supportive. Her testimony included disturbing details from Harold's psychological evaluation, where he had shown no genuine remorse and had actually expressed pride in his ability to fool everyone for so long. Margaret's surviving relatives took the witness stand in heartbreaking succession. Her nephew, Thomas Chen, now 45 and a federal prosecutor in Seattle, delivered victim impact testimony that left the courtroom in tears. "Harold Brennan didn't just kill my aunt," Thomas stated, his voice breaking. "He killed her again every time he pretended to comfort our family. Every time he attended a memorial service, every time he offered to help with the investigation, he was torturing us. He stole 54 years of justice from Margaret, and 54 years of peace from our family. Margaret's cousin Sarah Williams, one of the last surviving members of her generation, spoke about the decades of wondering and hoping. "We never gave up believing that someday we would know the truth," Sarah testified. "But we never imagined that the person who had been supporting us all these years was the monster we were searching for." The defense attempted to argue that the DNA evidence, while compelling, had been contaminated during the decades of storage. They brought in their own forensic expert, Dr. Marcus Thompson from the University of Pennsylvania, who questioned the chain of custody and suggested that cross-contamination could have occurred. However, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the state's forensic geneticist, methodically dismantled these arguments. The sample was stored in optimal conditions and showed no signs of degradation or contamination, Dr. Walsh testified. The genetic markers we identified from the 1963 evidence match Mr. Brennan's DNA with a probability of 1 in 47 billion. This is among the strongest DNA matches I've ever encountered in my career. During cross-examination, Harold's demeanor remained unnaturally calm, almost detached. When asked directly if he had killed Margaret Chen, he responded with chilling indifference. "I don't recall the specific details of that evening." His attorney immediately objected, but the damage was done. Several jurors later reported that this response, rather than a clear denial, convinced them of his guilt. The prosecution's closing argument, delivered by District Attorney Rebecca Martinez, painted a comprehensive picture of Harold's 5-decade deception. "Harold Brennan is not just a killer," Martinez told the jury. "He is a predator who has been feeding off this family's pain for 54 years. He attended their gatherings, he accepted their gratitude, he participated in their memorials, all while knowing he was the very person they sought justice against." The jury deliberated for only 6 hours before returning with a verdict of guilty on all charges: first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and providing false information to law enforcement. When the verdict was read on November 18, 2016, Harold showed no visible emotion. Judge Patricia Coleman sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 20 years for the ancillary charges. "Mr. Brennan," Judge Coleman stated during sentencing, "your crimes extend far beyond the murder of Margaret Chen. You have spent more than 5 decades perpetuating a cruel deception that compounded the suffering of everyone who loved her. The depth of your callousness is matched only by the determination of those who never stopped seeking justice for Margaret." The ripple effects of Harold's conviction extended throughout the Polish Hill neighborhood and beyond. Property values on Bigelow Boulevard, which had slowly recovered over the decades, experienced another temporary decline as the area once again became associated with violent crime. The revelation that Harold had been living among them, trusted and respected, forced many long-time residents to confront uncomfortable questions about how well they truly knew their neighbors. Father Michael Kowalski, who had served St. Stanislaus Church since 1998, organized community healing sessions to help residents process the shocking revelation. "We must remember that evil can hide behind the most ordinary facades," Father Kowalski said during a packed Sunday service 2 weeks after the conviction. "But we must also remember that truth, however long delayed, will ultimately prevail." The case prompted significant changes in how the Pittsburgh Police Department handles cold cases. Chief Scott Schubert announced the formation of a specialized cold case DNA unit, funded partly by federal grants and partly by private donations from the Chen Family Foundation. The unit would be equipped with the latest genetic genealogy technology and staffed by investigators trained specifically in historical case analysis. Detective Raymond Murphy, now retired but serving as a consultant to the unit, reflected on the case's broader implications. "Margaret Chen's case taught us that we can never truly close a case in our hearts," Murphy observed. "The technology exists now to revisit virtually every unsolved homicide from the past 60 years. We owe it to families like the Chens to pursue every possible lead, no matter how much time has passed." The advanced DNA analysis techniques that solved Margaret's case have since been applied to dozens of other cold cases throughout Pennsylvania. The state legislature passed the Margaret Chen Cold Case Act in 2017, mandating that all law enforcement agencies preserve biological evidence from unsolved homicides for a minimum of 75 years and requiring periodic review using updated forensic technologies. The legislation has become a model for similar laws in other states, extending Margaret's legacy far beyond Pittsburgh. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, whose forensic work was instrumental in solving the case, has used Margaret's story in training sessions for law enforcement agencies across the country. The Chen case demonstrates why we must never consider any homicide truly unsolved, Dr. Walsh explains to new forensic investigators. Every piece of evidence, no matter how small or old, potentially contains the key to justice. We're not just analyzing DNA samples. We're fulfilling promises made to victims and their families decades ago. Her laboratory has since solved more than 40 cold cases using similar genetic genealogy techniques, bringing closure to families who had waited years or decades for answers. Margaret's story has also become a cornerstone case study in criminal psychology programs, illustrating the concept of perpetrators who insert themselves into their victims' stories. Dr. Patricia Reeves has published extensively about Harold's psychological profile, contributing to a better understanding of how certain criminals derive satisfaction from observing the aftermath of their crimes. The Brennan case challenges our assumptions about how killers behave after committing their crimes. Dr. Reeves wrote in the Journal of Forensic Psychology, "His ability to maintain a facade of concern and support while secretly knowing the truth represents a particularly disturbing form of psychological sadism." The financial impact of solving Margaret's case extended beyond the immediate costs of investigation and prosecution. The Chen family established a $3 million endowment at the University of Pittsburgh to fund research into genetic genealogy and cold case investigation techniques. Thomas Chen, Margaret's nephew, left his federal prosecutor position in 2018 to establish the Margaret Chen Justice Foundation, which provides funding and technical support for cold case investigations nationwide. "My aunt's death destroyed our family in 1963, Thomas explains, but solving her case has given us a way to help other families find the answers they deserve. Harold Brennan died in state prison on February 14, 2019, at age 89, having served only 2.5 years of his life sentence. His death sparked mixed reactions among Margaret's surviving relatives and the Polish Hill community. Some felt cheated that he had avoided serving a full sentence for his crimes, while others found peace in knowing he had died behind bars, his reputation and legacy forever destroyed. Sarah Williams, Margaret's cousin, attended Harold's sparse funeral service at a state facility. "I wanted to see him buried," Sarah explained to reporters. "I wanted to know that this chapter was truly closed." The house on Bigelow Boulevard where Margaret was killed was finally demolished in 2018, replaced by a small memorial garden maintained by the neighborhood association. A bronze plaque installed through donations from community members and the Chen Family Foundation reads, "In memory of Margaret Lynn Chen, 1944-1963, whose pursuit of justice inspired a community and whose legacy continues to bring healing to families seeking truth." The garden features plants that bloom throughout the year, ensuring that something beautiful grows where tragedy once occurred. Margaret's case has influenced popular culture as well, inspiring documentaries, true crime podcasts, and academic research. The Investigation Discovery Network produced a 2-hour special about the case in 2020, titled The Neighbor's Secret, The Margaret Chen Story. The program reached 2 to 1 million viewers and generated renewed interest in genetic genealogy as a tool for solving cold cases. However, the family has been selective about media appearances, choosing to focus on projects that emphasize the investigative techniques rather than sensationalizing the crime itself. The Polish Hill neighborhood, while forever changed by Margaret's story, has evolved into a close-knit community that takes pride in its resilience and commitment to justice. Annual memorial walks are held each November, with residents gathering to remember not just Margaret, but all victims of unsolved crimes. The walks have grown from a few dozen participants in 2017 to more than 300 people in recent years, including law enforcement officers, forensic scientists, and families of other murder victims. As we reflect on Margaret Chen's story more than 60 years after her death, her legacy extends far beyond the resolution of a single cold case. She represents the thousands of victims whose cases remain unsolved, whose families continue waiting for answers, and whose stories demand our continued attention and commitment to justice. The advanced forensic techniques that finally brought her killer to justice offer hope for countless other families, while the dedication of investigators like Detective Murphy reminds us that some promises should never be broken. The transformation of a 1963 tragedy into a catalyst for modern justice demonstrates that no crime is ever truly forgotten, no victim's story ever truly ends, and no family's pain should ever be ignored. Margaret Chen's case will continue inspiring investigators, comforting families, and reminding communities that truth, however long delayed, possesses an enduring power to heal and restore faith in justice. Today, if you're watching this late at night wondering about unsolved cases in your own community, remember Margaret's story proves that answers can emerge even after decades of silence, and that somewhere, dedicated professionals are still working to bring those answers home.